Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today we're going to be talking about the new card promo for April 20th, Eremot the Mind Splinter, which is out now on the servers. You can get free copies of it by playing games and winning games in Expedition or Throne. So go ahead and run a game, and you can get a free copy of this one. And of course, that'll be available for the rest of the week until you have 4 copies, at which point you can no longer accumulate copies. I think it also is purchasable in a promo bundle. Typically, you can get 4 copies of it in premium ahead of time. But yeah, in any case, let's talk about this card. This is Eremot the Mind Splinter, a little bit of a follow-up to the plotline of the last Zolta set. It kind of looks like we're moving back towards Argenport at this point, and the next set might be focused a little bit more on the dealings of the Scions. But Eremot the Mind Splinter is migrating and is currently hanging out around the Eternal Throne, talking to Vara. So we have a 3/5 for 4 with triple shadow that has flying and deadly. So it's got Steward of the Past stats in terms of general stat line, except it's flying, which is a very big deal for a deadly unit. That actually makes for a very good defensive unit, since the 3/5 stat line is typically really, really hard to kill. It's monocolored, which is not amazing because it can be annihilated and other things like that, and most of the hybrid stuff that would kill is a little bit more inefficient. But overall, it's a really well-statted unit for 4, although that influence cost is very, very heavy, and I think weighs very much into it being not as efficiently statted a unit for 4 as you might expect. When Eremot hits the enemy player, transform it into Eremot's Clutches attached to that player. And Eremot's Clutches reads, at the end of the cursed player's turn, deal 1 damage to them for each card that they played this turn and gain that much health. Then transform Eremot's Clutches into Eremot Mind Splinter. So, you attack with Eremot Mind Splinter. If you hit the enemy player, then it turns into a curse, which I believe is blocked by Aegis, so it won't transform if you have an Aegis, but it won't die either. In any case, you get the transform effect, and then your opponent's turn starts. Eremot is no longer on the board, so it can't be targeted by any slow removal. And at that point, any cards that your opponent plays will cause you to gain life while they lose life, which is a fairly minor effect, but when Eremot is hitting over and over again, can be really, really effective. Combined with other ways to limit your opponent's play, like, say, for example, Hammer of Authority, to limit the ability for them to play cards on your turn, it becomes a little bit interesting in terms of how you can sort of manage Eremot and make him a pretty hard card to deal with in terms of, like, general removal. All of Eremot's abilities are generally evasive. I think all of his incarnations have some sort of, like, mild evasion. There's an unblockable one, there's a flying one. This one has, like, a particularly strong setup where basically, like, it is just going to transform into stuff on your opponent's turn, but on the first play, it's still pretty vulnerable, and overall, the ability that it's giving you is maybe not that effective. Eremot's Clutches, on the other hand, resolves into about 2 life per turn. Typically, your opponent has to play a power card every turn, and power cards will trigger this ability. And then also, they have to play at least 1 unit per turn, and so that's an average of 2 life per turn, since frequently people will play more than 1 card in a turn, and sometimes they'll only play just a power and pass. In those cases, you're gaining a decent amount of life off of Eremot's hits. That means that Eremot is hitting for effectively something around the lines of like a 5/5 or a 6/5, which for 4 is a reasonable stat line, especially when you factor in the pseudo lifesteal attached to it. Some disadvantages to that, however, is that since the card transforms into Eremot's Clutches and then transforms back into Eremot's Mind Splinter, it doesn't gain the benefits of any permanent effects. You can't put weapons on it because the weapons will fall off when it transforms. Any permanent augments, I believe, are removed. I don't believe there's any special conditions for Eremot Mind Splinter. As always, it's a digital card game, so there's the potential for that to actually happen anyways, but I'm fairly certain that if you, say, augmented form an Eremot Mind Splinter, it would transform into a 9 damage unit, attack in, deal the damage, transform into an Eremot's Clutches, and then when it transforms back, it would be a 3/5 again. So there's some difficulty getting a lot of the, like, recursive advantage that's really common in Shadow, where you have, like, Dark Return, you have the Exalted triggers off of Immortalize. All that stuff really doesn't apply as much to Eremot Mind Splinter, since Eremot is kind of a standalone card in that respect. Also, he has a really, really deep Shadow requirement, which means that he's not a card that you can effectively play with other colors very often. He's right along the lines of like Tazbu the Forbidden, and as a comparison, Tazbu the Forbidden is a 6/6 deadly for 5 with warp. So like the stat line here is really, really tricky. It's not a strong reason to go Mono Shadow, but I think if you're in Mono Shadow, you certainly don't feel bad about the card being in your deck. So if you're playing towards a Tazbu type deck and you want to play with Eremot Mind Splinter, this is a fairly solid value card that's going to get you a decent amount of survivability and a really good flying blocker that can actually solve a lot of problems in the early game. It's very resilient to aggro, it does really well, and then like once the aggro is starting to like sort of transition, once you're starting to transition into the beatdown against aggro, if you're playing some sort of shadowy control deck, then Eremot Mind Splinter starts to steal life and then get you into a position where you're feeling a little better off. So all of that kind of leads to a card that plays pretty well in a mid-range control style or a slow control style. This is Expedition legal as well, so that makes it like a little bit better because you can of course play it in Expedition where the card pool is a little bit more limited. Annihilate is not, I think, nearly as popular, and just general like card destruction is not going to be quite as common, so this card can get into kind of a more tricky situation. I think overall he's providing a lot of hidden benefits and like really kind of stabilizes you, but he isn't really a build around for most decks. There's not a lot of strong things that you can do with him yet. There may be things in the future that Eremot Mind Splinter is very particularly strong with. So play him in Mono Shadow, play him with Devouring Shadow. There's not a lot too much to say about this card beyond that. I think it's overall a little below average on power level, but there is some potential for it to get pretty interesting in terms of its stabilizing effect on Shadow decks. It definitely gives you a better alternative to say like Impending Doom as like a big beefy unit that you can slam down to defend yourself if you're trying to move into a more slow control style as opposed to a faster aggro style in Mono Shadow. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, overall, I'm not terribly impressed with this card. It's still kind of cool. The art on it is amazing. It's got a really, really cool piece of Nightmare art. The lore is also very good. Go ahead and check that out. I believe we'll put a link down in the description. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about this one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And as always, we're on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Patreon. Special thanks to all of our Patreon viewers. We're going to be putting up some names over there. And yeah, I think we will over there. Did I point it right? I pointed in the wrong direction. There we go. Anyways, yeah, so special thanks to all of our Patreon folks, and also a special thanks to Gibbon++ for donating to our stream recently, which was a very big help. Thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate you all. Have a good evening, and stay safe out there. Cheers.